Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. On the show today, we are going to analyse some of the key decisions taken at the 48th meeting of the Goods and Services Tax Council, chaired by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Meeting after a gap of 6 months, the Council took up and approved 8 of the 15 items on the agenda due to paucity of time. One of its key decisions has been to decriminalise certain offences, doubling the threshold for launching prosecution under the tax law to now 2 crore rupees. For fake invoicing, the limit of 1 crore rupees has been retained. Besides, the Council also clarified on the definition of SUVs for levy of compensation cess over GST and decided to come out with parameters to define MUVs. Some other decisions include scrapping the 5% GST levy on a cattle feed ingredient, husk of pulses, and the reduction of the levy on ethyl alcohol used by refineries to blend with petrol to 5% from the existing 18%. The need and impact of these decisions is what we'll try and understand from distinguished experts joining us on the program. Pleased to welcome in the studio Mr. Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor, The Business Standard. And joining us virtually are 2 guests, Mr. Bimal Jain, Chair, Indirect Taxes Committee, PhD, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Mr. Abhishek Atre, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Mr. Bhattacharjee, let me begin the program today with you. One of the major decisions, of course, has been decriminalising certain offences, also increasing the threshold for initiating prosecutions. So to begin with, help us and our viewers understand what kind of offences will now not be considered for criminal prosecution under the GST law.
Yeah, that's an interesting part. But let me say what's happened, why the decriminalisation thing has come along. In the last 1 year, in fact, slightly more than 1 year, the government has been consistently taking the position that in most of the laws, the provisions of criminal intent and criminal activity is gradually being phased out. So, corporate law, companies law, large number of provisions have been taken out from criminal prosecution. Similarly, in the case of income tax, lots of things have been taken out. What's essentially been happening is the government is saying that if I want to say that India is a comfortable place to do business, then it should be seen also as a comfortable place to be doing business. So, what's the contract that the government is rather trying to ensure with the taxpayers? That you pay the tax and I'll ensure that you are not victimized, you are not hauled up for any obvious or any minor mistakes also. Why is this important? Because as you would have noticed, GST collections have started soaring massively. Now that is a very impressive vote of confidence on both sides. It's now averaging about 1.45 trillion for the last several months. Now, if that is a collection rate on which the government is finding that people are paying the tax, then what is the big deal of making it also, putting also the what is called the stick? Let us instead accept that people are willing, more people are finding out the benefits of being under the GST structure. So therefore, the business environment has become pro-GST. So therefore, let's reward the business environment by taking away the criminal provisions.
Okay, let's understand what the business perspective is. Mr. Jain, how is the industry reacting to this move? The government calls it path breaking. Do you find it as path breaking as you would have expected?
Indeed, if we look at this recommendation by GST Council for decriminalization, let me explain to all the viewers, there are 12 specified offences for prosecution provision under section 132. The first welcome change, which is now the threshold limit for this decriminalization increased from 1 crore to 2 crore rupees for all the 12 specified offences except one, where invoice is being issued without supply of goods or services, which is called fake invoice. For that fake invoice, limit continue to be 1 crore, otherwise threshold increased from 1 crore to 2 crore rupees. There are 3 specified offences out of 12 specified offences decriminalized. obstruction for performance of duties by the tax officer, which happened to be one of the offense for prosecution provision, is now being decriminalized. Tampering of evidences, that is again decriminalized, and supply of information, it is again decriminalized. So 3 specified offenses out of 12 under section 132 of CGST Act is decriminalized. Having said that, another provision which is eye-catchy and important one, compounding of offenses. When we talk about decriminalization, it's a good aspect, threshold increase from 1 crore to 2 crore, barring fake invoice and fake credit, and decriminalization of 3 specified offenses, but compounding of offenses, which is there and within the GST law. And it is being reduced from 50% to 150%. From 50 to 150, it is reduced to 25 to 100%. Just for the sake of information and for the understanding of the viewers, if tax amount is 10 lakh rupees, so for compounding of offenses, earlier limit was 50% to 150%, which is now going to be reduced from 25% to 100%. From industry side, of course, a welcome step. We were expecting that there would be decriminalization, there would be threshold increase, but let me tell you from the PSD CCI what we have recommended, and we have given our suggestion as a pre-budget memorandum to the government. We wanted the threshold of 5 crore, which is for non-bailable offense, should be increased from 5 crore to 20 crore rupees. And this prosecution provision should be launched only when there's a fraud intent. It must be proven. If at all we are looking for each of business for the trade, industry, and commerce, it should not be initiated in ad hoc basis unless fraud intended is being proven, and then only prosecution should be launched. So we were expecting little bigger pie, but nevertheless, GST Council has considered this aspect, and they have increased the threshold from 1 crore to 2 crore. They have decriminalized 3 specified offenses out of 12. Even compounding amount is being reduced from 50% to 150%, from 50 to 150% to 25 to 100%. These are the welcome steps.
Okay, so that was the industry perspective. Coming to you, Mr. Atre, for the legal perspective, and especially because the expectations on setting up of appellate tribunals, something that would decongest the high courts, has not happened. That was spoken about a lot in the times to come. That is the need of the hour. On that, no decision could be taken. It could not be taken up in the GST Council Meet. Is that a disappointment? Because now it means all of these disputes will continue to clog the high courts?
Demand of GST tribunal is very far. See, from last 5 years, this GST regime, the people are demanding because our high courts are overburdened. But presently, any person aggrieved by any order of GST authority has to approach high court by way of writ, which are previously very overburdened. So it was sought that the tribunals must be there to reduce the burden of high courts. And as cleared by Honorable Finance Minister that it is on the agenda, but due to paucity of time, it could not be taken up. But we see that in near future it will come. These tribunals will come, like NGT or several other tribunals. So tax regime is a very specialized regime. High court judges, you see, high court judges can't be so expert in every field. So these tribunals, when it will be formed by experts only in the field of tax, GSTs. Otherwise, with regard to this 2 crore rupees, see, from last around 2-3 years back, there was a circular also issued to Central Agency System. So in Supreme Court, whenever a case involves a tax amount less than 2 crore, so it is directed to central government not to go in prosecution or not to file cases, SLPs in Supreme Court. And whenever SLPs or matters are pending which are filed by central government, in which tax amount is less than 2 crore, though all those cases were withdrawn by government.
But
So
for
this
now,
two
because
crore
because
was,
the
very much
setting up of the appellate tribunals, Mr. Bhattacharjee, has been delayed for now. It means they will continue, such cases will continue to clog the high courts at least until a decision on this regard is taken. But very quickly, if I could also understand from you, and before we move to the next decisions of the GST Council, how will these changes that have been announced materialize? Does it mean that the centre will now have to make these changes in the finance bill, and then these amendments will also have to be subsequently brought in by states? How are they going to materialize in the times to come?
GST Council's decision, that's a good question. I was also thinking about it. Most of the time what the GST Council decision means is corresponding changes in the CGST and the SGST laws. So it's the respective states and the centre which will have to make the changes. Would not be in the finance bill. I would expect that they would be through corresponding changes in the schedules, which would correspond to these acts, where these would be made. I'll have to check out, and I think Mr. Attre might be able to tell us better whether the whether the 2 crore thing was in the law or whether it was in the schedule. I suspect it was in the schedule.
It is in the law itself,
It's
in
in the
section
law.
132 itself, it was there. Up to 1 crore to 2 crore penalty is up to 1 year imprisonment. From 2 crore to 5 crore, it is up to 3 years imprisonment. From 5 crore onwards, it's 5 years imprisonment.
So what does that indicate, Mr. Attre? Does it mean that no changes, I mean, all of these changes, for them to be incorporated,
Yes.
how long will it take to materialize is the question? Because if we wanted these changes for long, the demands by the industry had been pending for long. Now it's happened 6 months after the GST Council has met, that the decision has been taken. The next question of the industry is going to be, how long will it take to materialize?
Yes. If government wants, it's a matter of 1 day only. Because the parliament is going to be in session, they can pass the law to amend these provisions, to bring these suggestions. So now everything is ready, the food is ready, it's just to bring it on table.
Okay. So let's see how it happens. But now moving across to the...
But I
Yes,
don't
by finance bill, they can do so, and for finance bill, it can be passed from any house of parliament.
Okay.
It can be, but there'll have to be corresponding changes in the state GST laws also.
Right.
So I suspect that would also need to be looked at. These are changes which does take a bit of time to go through. GST, I suspect after some days we shall be getting
30
to
days
see.
whenever notification is being issued. And certain recommendation which is by way of circular can be issued within 2-3 days to clarify and to remove ambiguity and dispute. In terms of changes in GST law which is being proposed, and we are discussing decriminalization, this threshold of 1 crore to 2 crore, and certain specified offences are decriminalized, including reduction of compounding amount. These are a part and parcel of GST Act, CGST Act and SGST Act. For this, it need to be amended the Act. For that, they need to bring in finance bill or correspondingly ordinance to make the changes in the respective CGST and all state SGST Act. This may take, to me, looks like budget is round the corner. It is on 1st of February. To me, looks like they will make all these changes in the Finance Bill 2023 so that these provisions can be inserted in CGST Act and corresponding all state SGST Act.
Okay, I think so that happens in the budget sessions first. The centre moves with the changes and then the states will follow by passing the amendments, paving way for these changes to be made more effective. Moving on, Mr. Bhattacharjee, there are some other important decisions that have also been taken. Apart from the decriminalization aspect, what have been the highlights for you in terms of reduction in taxes, in terms of other demands that the industry had been making?
Yeah, one of the major things that has not happened, and that is something that we were looking at it more as an economic point of view, is that the rate of GST is considerably high. The median rate, I mean at 18%, frankly speaking, on any professional, that means about an 18% tax, plus if that person is also paying a threshold income tax, that almost comes to 50% of the tax. That is something that is being correspondingly being talked about, that this actually puts a fairly high degree of taxation rate and there is enough reason for that tax to come down to something much more lower. But for that to happen, two things. First of all, we'll have to see through the end of this year, because this is the year when the country is coming out of a pandemic effect. Now, for the states to agree that they will actually agree for a lower tax rate and yet hope for a buoyancy. And remember, this year the center has decided that the compensation, it will not be at the rate of 14%. So that means that the states will have to make extra efforts. So that is the big change, which from the consumer's point of view is still something which has not been done, and which is something which keeps on coming, but like it comes up and then sort of goes back. The other is, of course, the taxation on the new areas of tax areas like pan masala, gutka, and also on online gambling. That I was expecting that it would take time. Why? The reason why it would take time is that there are still different constituencies. If you go to any industry discussion, there are different stakeholders, and it's still not a settled field, even though the report has come in, but the report itself has got several ifs and buts into it. So that is the major point. My concern is about setting up of an appellate tribunal. The appellate tribunal, while Mr. Athre was saying right that there should be an appellate tribunal, the effectiveness of many tribunals in having reduced tax related cases has not been very exemplary. They've taken off the burden of high courts to a certain extent, but the reason why many of the tribunals had to be given a fresh thought and had to be closed was precisely because they were not up to par.
Right.
So that is something which is why the GST Council has wisely decided that it will not, as of now, take a decision on setting up an appellate tribunal. Because besides, there's also the question of like who mans it in terms of what's the authority under which that sort of a tribunal comes through. Remember the Supreme Court order on GST Council, which is itself has opened up a bit of a issue about what is the authority of the GST Council regarding laws, what is the centre's power, and what is the vis-a-vis the state power. There's a lot of dispute now coming up, or rather I should say tussle coming up between the centre and the states on mutual taxation powers, and GST is a very prominent part of it, being the one of the fastest growing areas. So therefore all those issues will have to be sorted out, and that's why the GST Council has probably decided to hasten slowly.
That's an interesting aspect, Mr. Athre, the fact that if there has to be a tribunal to sort of, lessen the burden of the high courts, the question will always be on how effective should it be. The larger objective, if it is to, is redressal of the disputes, and if it is not effective enough, as Mr. Bhattacharya pointed out, there have been several tribunals that have not, played the part for which they've been created, it is going to pose another challenge. Mr. Athre.
No, see, there is always judicial review is part of basic structure of our constitution. If there is no remedy, the remedy is Article 226. High Court can, any person can approach High Court for any grievance if there is no remedy available. See, if appellate tribunals are there, if they are not functioning, then in those cases also, otherwise also they can approach High Court. High Court is very well there. High Court is not going to take entire things away from the High Court. Like in NGT matters or in other matters, it happens there are several judgments. The powers of High Courts cannot be taken away. The powers of High Courts are basically of judicial review. If appellate tribunals doesn't pass proper order, then the person can approach to High Court by way of writ under Article 226. Even if there is remedy provided for appeal, in those cases also it was held that where anything illegally done or against law, or there are several parameters on which we can approach high courts. So high courts will remain there, their jurisdiction will remain there, just as a substitute, not as a substitute, but to subsist the high courts. These tribunals will be there. Several
hits, but several misses also, Mr. Bhattacharya, in terms of the expectations and the larger concern about rationalization of the structure itself. The fact is that one would expect, and at least as taxpayers, we would expect a of course, better outcomes and effective structuring, effective GST mechanism structure, it looks like due to paucity of time, several of these agenda items could not be taken up. The fact that the GST Council met after a gap of 6 months, that in itself is also quite concerning. The fact that we are seeing the centre and the state have to govern the mechanism together, but that's clearly not happening, and that also is quite concerning for us.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, especially the very fact that the GST Council, remember, takes most of its decisions unanimously has been one of its great features. So the fact that the GST Council, when it meets, even before it meets, most of the decisions are already hammered out among the different states. It wasn't happening. And so therefore, this was a challenge to make it happen. I quite like what Mr. Jain was talking about the roadmap, and that's what I was talking about earlier. The very fact that the GST roadmap of where that rates would actually go towards should be guiding us. But the broad point is GST today is not an esoteric tax. It's a tax that affects all of us. So since it's a tax which affects all of us, it needs to be, and it has to be, by definition, a simple one. People should just pay the GST and move on, right, without having to think about, what are the paperwork that is involved in it. So that is where we need to be looking at in terms of where are we progressing towards and what is it that the GST is able to do. The big questions will get sorted out only when the people also feel that this is a good tax. Remember, we have had a problem with the national payment pension system, and there's been a rollback in some of the states. Now, that's not a happy thing. Now, we don't want a significant reform like GST to start having questions. Right. And that, I think, is very important for all the constituencies to be able to say loud and clear that we are moving without ever thinking of withdrawing any of our steps on the route to better GST.
And clearly, I think towards that, what's required is more intense deliberations on part of the centre and the states, and perhaps more effective outcomes that can that can be discussed as we are discussing today. But that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you once again, Mr. Atre, Mr. Jain, and Mr. Bhattacharjee, for joining us on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. It's a wrap on this edition of Perspective. I'll see you same time tomorrow. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.